Welcome to TezTalks Radio. I am your host, Marissa True, and joining us today is Imran Haqeem, the Deputy Head of Lab Strategy at TZ APAC, the Tezos adoption entity based in Singapore. So how are you, Imran?
Yeah, hey Marissa, super happy to be here and talk about Fortify Labs and some of the stuff that we've been doing at TZ APAC.
Yeah, so I would definitely love to dig into everything to do with Fortify Labs. For the uninitiated, it is the Web3 startup studio that began out of TZ APAC, and it's probably one of the leading initiatives that's coming from the APAC region. But before we get into that, I would love for you to share a bit more about your personal journey into the world of crypto, into blockchain, and specifically Tezos. Like, what was it that attracted you to this space?
Yeah, so I mean, the first time I ever heard about like crypto and Bitcoin was actually back in like 2016, 2017. So I was like fresh out of school at this time. Didn't have much money, but I actually heard about it from some of my friends online, like playing video games and stuff with them, and like instantly I found it, quite attractive. So that was when I sort of purchased the first bit of Bitcoin that I had. I bought it through my friend's brother, and that was like my first exposure. I still have the screenshot of like I remember the top 10 currencies. I think Tezos was there at that point in time, and yeah, so that was like my first exposure to it. I didn't dig really that deep into the industry then. I was like focused on studying. So I studied mechanical engineering, was meant to do my master's, and then like COVID hit. I mean, it's a long story, but to make it short, when COVID hit, I took a break and then I decided, hey, I want to like break into tech. After working in engineering for a bit, I, worked as a data analyst at one point, and then found the opportunity at TZ APAC. So, I joined as an analyst, and now I've been here for the past sort of 3 years. And prior to that, I've had like experience sort of working in sales at startups and stuff like that. Yeah, so, over the past 3 years, when I initially joined, off the bat, I was working with like really early stage projects. I used to help sort of run the small grants program, which helped like write sort of small checks to people who had like big dreams, and eventually that sort of transitioned into more of an incubator model, and currently now Fortify Labs. So I would say like Fortify Labs is actually the work of like 3 years of iteration of what we've identified from founders, and like the hundreds of conversations that we've had with various people.
So it sounds like your exposure to crypto had a massive influence not only on your sort of academic trajectory, but your professional ambitions as well. But it also sounds like you took a lot of the learnings that you generated before entering into this space and are sort of giving it new life within the Web3 domain or the Web3 environment. So to give our audiences, like, I guess, a bit of a stronger primer on what exactly Fortify Labs is, like, what is its mission? What is it that you are setting out to achieve?
Yeah. So yeah, the one liner is like Fortify Labs is a startup studio focused on turning startups into commercially viable sort of businesses. But I think to expand on that, really like what makes us sort of different from other, accelerators or incubators is that just the high level of support and expertise that we provide. So, like one key difference, for instance, like typically speaking, accelerators last for like 3 months, right? So it's kind of a short stint. You have this like very focused work period, and we have that as well, except like we extend it towards 8 months. So meaning that let's say if you if you join at the start of the program, you might be building. Once you go to market, we'll be there with you as well. And yeah, like I said, the current state of Fortify Labs is the result of years of sort of iteration. So we've kind of curated the program based on all of the different stories we've heard from founders, and the experiences they've had specifically within the Tezos ecosystem. And I think like definitely if you think about crypto ecosystems in general, what people really care about is the level of touch point that they have with the ecosystem entities. So that's something that we know that we can solve like fairly easily. We have a very passionate team that cares a lot about these individuals. Yeah, so we take in like 7 projects a year, and we help them with a bunch of stuff from fundraising to partnerships to customer acquisition, legal support, etc. But yeah, I can speak deeper into like exactly what it is further down the line.
Before we sort of dig into that, Fortify Labs launched in April of this year. And as you said, it was a very iterative process. It changed and evolved basically as you had ongoing conversations with various project founders. But from the get-go, what was sort of the types of projects that you would see applying, or where did you see the vast majority of interest come from?
Yeah, I mean, so because of the time that we spent, building the Tezos ecosystem in general, we already had a bunch of projects that we really wanted in the program. But on top of that, we had like an open application. A bunch of people applied. Some were like long time, Tezos projects that wanted to take the next step and grow. Some were like completely new projects from different ecosystems. So yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad range, including even like the stage of applicants, right? Some are like super early stage, they've just built a product to go to market. Others have already, done their seed round and maybe raising like pre-A, for instance. So, it's everything from like sort of art focused to sort of gaming focused. And we don't have like a preference in terms of vertical or anything like that. But I think generally speaking, we saw a lot of like consumer applications rather than sort of infrastructure project, for instance. Yeah, I mean, I think that's generally a good trend to see, and what I see in Asia in general. And yeah, I mean, I think as sort of value accrues to the application layer, like it will be definitely a positive for us.
Yeah, I think once you sort of see the evolution of development go from infrastructure to, I guess, more DApp focused, then we sort of start to see where the interest and the momentum is building to actually bring in that end user and to make Web3 sort of applicable to everyone. Um, Again, going back to one of your points around how iterative the process was, like what was the biggest change you think that TZ APAC learned once it embarked on Fortify Labs? Like what was the biggest change from the beginning through to the way that you run the program now?
Well, I think typically speaking, when you think about accelerators, a lot of them have a super high focus on, say, fundraising. But, I think that isn't always true, right? There's, one of the things that we've really changed is just the sort of level of touch points we have with these projects, right? So it's not just hey, I'll make an introduction and I'll sort of let you take it. There's let's spend a week talking about how we're going to approach this introduction. Who else do you want to get introduced to? Is this even the right person to introduce you to? So there's a lot of like strategy behind it, and we sort of meet with the projects like every week. So I think generally speaking, projects see a lot of value in that, right? So I think for them having the ability to have easy access to the Tezos ecosystem consistently, and having various teams consistently sort of thinking about them and bringing up opportunities to their door. I think it's something that is really valuable and underappreciated in sort of crypto ecosystems in general, right? It's easy to just sort of run hackathons and then be happy with how things went, but I think to really build an ecosystem, you really have to be in the middle of it, within the community, within the builders, and have a high level of touch points.
Right. So Fortify Labs basically guides them through the entire journey end to end rather than sort of giving them a little bit of support for, like you said, roughly 3 months and then booting out of the nest and hoping that they fly.
Yeah.
And I think what's super interesting there is you were saying a lot of the applicants that first arose came from a variety of stages. So they were all differing in sort of the levels of the levels of support they were actually seeking to obtain from TZ APAC
Yeah.
or Fortify Labs specifically. But then digging deeper into those projects, what were the sort of the qualities and the traits that you actually looked for in the applicants? Like what did you find were the traits that made projects more successful or more likely to be taken in by Fortify Labs?
Yeah. So I mean, our selection process was, I mean, fairly comprehensive, I think. So I think that's the sort of obvious things to look out for just from a project perspective. Like for instance, what's the attraction, sort of how big their market is, all those like standard metrics that you can look at. But I think especially for more early stage projects, like ideas can definitely change. And for these kind of projects, you're sort of betting more on the jockey rather than the horse, right? I think this makes it much trickier to identify like exactly who you're betting on. But there are a couple of things that personally I think are really important to look for in terms of like founder qualities, right? And I'll go into that. One of which I think is very important is called founder market fit, which is like how much does the founder actually know their market? Are they themselves a user, or are they just sort of somebody who put themselves there? Is the issue they're solving like, what's the story behind that, right? Did they experience something in their lives that make them realize, hey, I got to solve this issue? Or are they like just doing analysis and then suddenly, hey, look, there's a gap here, right? I think you have very different mindsets depending on how closely tied the problem is to yourself. And like being someone like that, you have the advantage of being your own user, right? So you don't have to you know find users each time. You can sort of trust your intuition to iterate. I think an important part as well is like what work experience they've had, right? Were they in the field in the past, or have they had like similar work experience? So I think founder market fit is quite important. Another one is, I think, the concept of like being a missionary versus a mercenary. Generally speaking, sort of missionary founders do better than mercenary founders just because they outlast them. Mercenary founders, for instance, are people who like really care about exiting, or like eventually buying their Lambo and chilling in Bali or whatever. Whereas like missionary founders are really focused on the ultimate mission and the problem that they're trying to solve. And yeah, like I said, like I think that in terms of like the motivation behind missionary founders versus mercenary founders is definitely much stronger, right? Missionary founders will just outlast mercenary founders, especially when things get hard. And I think an idea that I thought about a lot as well is like stubbornness, specifically the right kind of stubbornness. So I think a lot of founders are stubborn in general, which is not a bad thing. I think a certain amount of stubbornness is kind of necessary for a founder. But I was reading this Paul Graham essay the other day that breaks down stubbornness into sort of two main subtypes. It's either like persistence or obstinance, and persistence is like basically unwavering belief of a goal, whereas obstinance is the belief of how you get there. I think generally speaking, you want to optimize to minimize obstinance. So you should really care about what goal you're trying to solve, but be flexible in terms of how you get there, right? Um, so I think like a founder with low obstinance is just more capable of self-reflection and being honest with themselves in terms of their progress. And because of that, when they're building their startup, they can craft strategies that are actually more grounded to reality and make sense. So yeah, I think those are some things that I would look out for in founders. Honestly, it's really hard to find out, right? Especially in the context of like if we're interviewing these guys online, for instance, we have like maybe an hour that we're chatting with them. It's hard to understand how stubborn they are, or what kind of stubbornness they have, right? But you can see sort of hints as you go through the interview process. And that's, I think, a big reason why we've structured the program the way it is as well, because we actually do want to spend time working with these founders, right? We actually do want to find out who they are, what they care about, and what matters to them. So the structure of the program and the length of it definitely supplements to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you are sort of placing bets on people and their ability to execute on their idea. And I do think those are very critical qualities and traits that are often overlooked. And just to rehash what you mentioned, there is essentially having skin in the game, having something that they are personally invested in to some degree or other, being extremely mission driven. And then last but not least, extremely self aware in terms of what we would call stubbornness, or their grit, or their tenacity to accomplish their vision, regardless of the means of getting there. And as you said, if you've kind of got, roughly an hour to sort of make your own judgment call, I guess it forces a lot of self-awareness on your side as well to understand what it is you're looking for and what traits you're attracted to versus what you consider, I guess, riskier behaviors.
Yeah.
But then for those projects that are actually applying, how do they use Fortify Labs to their fullest advantage? Like, what are some of the support systems that Fortify Labs provides? I know you touched on fundraising and introduction to investor networks in particular, but how else does it differentiate itself from other incubator models?
Yeah, so I think like Fortify Labs is honestly quite a unique program. I think we definitely give sort of a very, very high level of care and attention to the startups that we sort of support. And I think that's especially now as ecosystems maybe focus more on numbers that just becomes more rare. So I think if startups enter the program with the right mindset, right, which is like they're here to do stuff, they're here to get stuff done, they're here to pivot if they need to. They're not going to sort of waste any time, even though the program is sort of 8 months. I think you can get a lot out of it, right? So I'll break down the various supports that we have into deeper detail. So, it's sort of broken down into, the internal teams that we have and also the sort of partners that we work with. So in terms of the internal team, we have the strategy team. So this team is mainly focused on advising the startups in terms of their go-to-market strategy or customer acquisition or anything like that, but also helping them operationalize any of the support. So, for instance, if one of them needed, I don't know, like marketing support, they would sort of make an introduction to the marketing team and stuff like that. So we also have mentors within the team, and collectively, the team as a whole has definitely seen like thousands of startups over our careers. So I think there's very deep sort of wisdom within the team that the teams can, the startups can definitely benefit from. I think wisdom at the end of the day saves time, hopefully. So if the startups are very open and willing to reflect on what's being said, I think they can get a lot out of it. There's also the marketing team. So this sort of allows the teams to directly tap into the distribution channels that we've built over the years as an ecosystem. They can get advisory on like how to grow their social presence, etc. But I think the most sort of valuable part that the marketing team actually provides is related to like the ability to aid go to market and aid product refinement, right? So one of the programs like we have is meant to bring. So we have a community of early adopters that any of the startups can tap. So when they want to go to market, generally speaking, startups, the first problem they will face is like how are they going to get their first 20 customers or whatever. So it's sort of a cold start issue in that sense. They just have to keep talking to a bunch of people. So by building a community of early adopters, we kind of help them get over that line very quickly, and then you can instantly do product refinement, right? You can have a high level touch point with this community because we're close to them, so you can instantly get feedback and do whatever tweaks you need to do. So yeah, getting your first customers and building a community out of it, I think the marketing team is really good at that. We also have a partnerships team. So, they help us build partnerships for Fortify Labs itself, meaning like, stuff like AWS credits and any advisors that we have that are external, for instance. But also actually bringing opportunities to the startups. So if we see any interesting institutional opportunities, any of these big firms that want to get into crypto, we'll definitely make an introduction. If we see like any links or potential partnerships that we could have between the startups and anybody in the ecosystem, we would do that. And also like we just have a super broad investor list as well that's sort of looking into the ecosystem that we've built over the past year, right? So if you're serious about fundraising, you're serious about building partnerships in your network, like the partnerships team is really good at that. So those are sort of the key internal teams that exist within Fortify Labs, meaning like you will basically get them any time of the day, and you can use all of this 24/7. And then there's sort of external teams as well that give additional support, and we provide if any sort of payment is required, we can help like subsidize some of it if it's too much. For instance, right, we have like legal support. We're working with this entity called Govern. So super experienced crypto lawyers that not just have legal expertise, but also have like angel networks and stuff like that. So like it's a multifaceted engagement. We have like developers that we work with from Tezos India that can help with any integration stuff. We have like legal support, developer support. and the various communities we have in the Tezos ecosystem that they can tap into. So, and a graphic design team as well if they need. Um, so it's like a mix of internal and external teams that these startups can tap on anytime, pretty much.
Right. So all of the incubators essentially can leverage all of the internal resourcing and power of the TZ APAC team and sort of treat them as almost like an extension of their own team. Like suddenly by working with Fortify Labs and TZ APAC, they have a marketing team and they have access to a developer resource pool, or they have access to TZ APAC's network. And I like what you mentioned about sort of the balance between the internal resources that TZ APAC provides, as well as the network externally, so that it helps those projects, I guess, proliferate through the Tezos ecosystem. Suddenly there's a lot more codependencies in terms of the way these different entities work together, and hopefully bring them farther along in terms of their journey. You briefly touched on the cold start problem and in terms of trying to recruit that first batch of users. And I know that you also have a community rewards program that's slightly linked to that, which is TZ APEX. How does Fortify Labs work in tandem with TZ APEX? How are they mutually reinforcing?
Yeah, so like you said, right, TZ Apex is a community rewards program. It started with the intention to sort of get early adopters to the projects in Fortify Labs. So we do this by sort of giving them some incentives to interact with the projects or do like tasks that sort of lead to meaningful growth for the projects. It could be like something simple like following them on Twitter, or it could be like something super in depth, like trying out the product on testnet or mainnet or whatever. And yeah, I mean, with sort of TZ Apex, there's a steady pool of users who can give their feedback after like testing the product, while also raising awareness for themselves. So if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken, like we've seen like some of the community members like making like Twitter threads about these projects, which are quite meaningful, right, for them as well. So I mean, yeah, I think that at the end of the day, initiatives like this bring everyone much closer together, right? TZ APAC to the community towards startups towards TZ APAC. It's like it's just a force that sort of brings everything together, which is I think what we need in the system.
So then, can you share a bit more about some of the success stories that you've actually seen come out of Fortify Labs already? I know since, it only launched in April, we're sort of probably dealing with the first cohort only. But what are sort of the early signs of momentum that you've seen in the earliest days?
Yeah, so I think that definitely some of the projects are moving quite quickly. There's like two in particular that's come to mind for this, right? One is Questflow. So Questflow is sort of a network for this decentralized AI agent workflow. Like think of it as almost like a Zapier for AI agents. And it's seen like quite significant growth since they had joined our program, in terms of like user acquisition and revenue generation. So they have like 30K beta users at this point, if I'm not mistaken, and they have like almost 1.8 million monthly recurring automations. Um, None of these is on mainnet yet, unfortunately, but they're working towards that, and they're very focused on customer acquisition right now, which I think they've been doing a fantastic job on. We've been helping them a lot with their fundraising. I'm not going to share too much about that, but I think they've been doing fairly well for themselves on that front as well. Another project that I think has grown quite organically within the Etherlink ecosystem is OCB Labs. So, they're essentially a toolkit to sort of on-chain everything. What it essentially is that, it sort of converts website code, i.e. like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and embeds it into the metadata of like NFTs. And the key thing is what it enables, which I think is like quite unique experiences. So for instance, you could have like completely on-chain Tetris or completely on-chain games or interactive experiences. So you can imagine how the surface area of what you can do with OCV is quite broad. And there's sort of two interesting things that they've done so far. One is like Block Reflex. It's initially a game that was sort of launched in ECC in Brussels, and they use that as a engagement method for the booth, etc. But I think one of the interesting things that they did there is they just added like a simple leaderboard so that people can compete. And even after the booth was over, people were still competing, right? Like, so whenever somebody saw their leaderboard or their high score getting broken, they would definitely sort of come back and try and beat it again. And we've seen like over 9,000 plays just for a simple memory game. So I like projects like that because they are, they don't focus on trying to build something super hard. They're just like, okay, let's just build a simple memory game with an interesting mechanic. Another thing that they did was with a community member. It's called a project called Degeneratives. It's quite simple as well. It just sort of allows users to make a set of emojis to represent how they're feeling. But I think that has seen like considerable growth as well. I think they have like more than 500 mints. There's a token attached to it that's seen like that's been doing quite well as well, and they have like very interesting bonding curve mechanics. So yeah, I think that for OCV in particular, those are like early inklings of product market fit, right? Which is like, hey, look, you can build a project that people like to engage with, and sort of where do we go from here? And that's what we're constantly sort of working with them on.
Right, as you said, it was a proof point in product market fit and how critical that is to the project's growth. But also, I guess that it indicates that there is a ready and willing base of users that are actively experimenting and trying out these various applications to see what sort of really developing at a pace that they're willing to work with and also wait for.
Yeah.
Then if we were to zoom out from there, do you see any sort of prevailing trends within the APAC Web3 market through the basis of the projects that you're interacting with, whether they are those that you've directly incubated into Fortify Labs or those that have simply applied?
Yeah.
Like, what are the types of projects that are, considerably more popular? What's your sense of how the Web3 APAC market is evolving?
Yeah. So I mean, I can speak on the behalf on I mean, from the perspective of the builders, I guess. I mean, definitely if you compare like sort of the APAC builders versus like let's say like Western builders, there's more applications rather than infrastructure projects in general. I think that's a given. Like most blockchains are really born out of this region, which I think is a really really good thing. I think it's a really positive sign, but I think gaming is a huge one in APAC in general. So I'm quite excited to see that take off. I mean, we've seen the Telegram, ecosystem do quite well, especially on the game side of things. So I think that's like something that somebody should capitalize on for sure. And yeah, I mean, maybe I can speak a little bit about some things that excite me in the space. But yeah, I think on-chain gaming is definitely going to take off. But like maybe with less like Ponzi-nomics. I think that would be nice. I think like social networks or like messaging platforms in general will do really well in sort of the APAC region. And I've seen a couple sort of decentralized compute networks come up that I think is quite interesting. But yeah, I think generally speaking, projects in APAC focus more on the applications for users. And I think that we'll probably see considerable growth on that front from a lot of the projects.
Right. So there's sort of like a graduation from the infrastructure development and more towards the application layer, and actually sort of seeing ecosystem builders actively create products for these end users. I do want to zoom it a little. Like, I like your comment regarding gaming has such high potential, but it's sort of at risk of falling mercy to the Ponzi-nomics that we've seen, I guess, throughout the industry for the last few years.
Yeah.
Do you think that's still a prevailing risk within the gaming space, or do you think that the potential is coming because they've sort of evolved past that stage?
I mean, I would like to say I would like to say that we've evolved past that stage, but I mean, obviously those kind of things still exist, right? Like recently, there was that whole tap coin craze, whatever that's on Telegram, which is just like you just tap the screen a bunch of times and earn whatever tokens to. But I think that obviously that's kind of like Ponzi-nomics but then I think if you think about how that team made money from the games, it actually wasn't by the tokens. It was actually by ad revenue that is generated. So I think that even though the mechanic of the game, maybe you might want to think about that, but I think like the fundamentals, which is like, hey, look, you can monetize games beyond that of just launching a token and dumping on your community, right? There are actually ways to make games engaging and sort of automate the whole ad revenue process. And I think that's a business model that like people should look into. And there's so many amazing distribution platforms now, like Telegram or Twitter and stuff like that, that you can actually get decent traction without building such a super complex game. Yeah, I think that as time goes on, hopefully, the sort of gaming market just matures beyond depending on dumping on tokens for their revenue source, which I think is going to happen.
So basically, while that tapping mechanism was a very loose or broad definition of what one could consider a game, there were still elements or components of it that would be successful should a more mature game be built around it, which I think is a really interesting observation. Then looking towards the future, like what is it that you hope to see more of when it comes to the projects that are coming to apply to Fortify Labs? And if you could give them some advice ahead of them coming to Fortify Labs, what would it be?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to continue sort of welcoming projects or applications in general with open arms. I think I would like to see some sort of projects that are more tied to the real world, where DeFi doesn't just sort of become a sort of loop that's feeding itself and sort of is actually grounded to reality. I think that would be interesting, though I think it'll be super difficult. But if somebody wants to solve that problem, like happy to chat to them about it. Yeah, I think one thing about the Etherlink ecosystem is that there's just so many opportunities at this point. Like it's really performant and the ecosystem is still growing. So a lot of the projects that um, you know there's still a lot of space to sort of innovate within Etherlink itself. So I'm happy to have like any conversations in general. It doesn't have to be an application. So if people just want to speak to me about their projects, happy to help them. But I think if you were to apply, I think just be sort of really honest about where you're at, be really clear about what you want to get out of Fortify Labs, exactly how we can help you, what's sort of meaningful to you, what isn't, the main problems that you're facing. And then let your personality shine during the interview, and I think you'll have a pretty good shot.
Right. So basically, remember that it's not really a one size fits all solution with regards to the program. It is very much come and take what it is that you need from us, and we'll mutually support one another to reach whatever goal it is that the project has, which I think is actually very significant because it points to the fact that this is not a prescriptive model. There's no single benchmark of success. And so it's very much sort of giving ownership to the founders to determine what their needs are at any given point in time, and then leveraging TZ APAC's expertise and resources to achieve that goal. We've touched on Fortify Labs. We've touched briefly on TZ APAC. What's coming up next? Like, what are the future plans or future initiatives that are sort of being baked within TZ APAC that these different projects and entities can look forward to?
Yeah, so I think the closest one is Tezos Realms. So during Token 2049, we're going to have a sort of side event called Tezos Realms. It's going to be at Chimes in Singapore. If the listeners know where that is, but it's going to be awesome. Like, I think it's going to be generally a Tezos ecosystem event. There's going to be all the whole Fortify Labs cohort is going to be there. Different other projects within the ecosystem, any partnerships we have and stuff like that. And the whole point of it is that we want it to be experiential rather than just people having sort of booths and standing there and smiling. So there's going to be a bunch of stuff to do there, and I think it's going to be good fun. So if you want to come and meet the Fortify Labs team, definitely come to the event, sign up. I'll pass Marissa the sign up link so you can add it on the bio or whatever later. But yeah, other than that event, we also want to sort of run another cohort next year, hopefully. So keep an eye out on that and sort of any news that comes our way.
And I guess my final question for you is that, with all of these projects in the works, what is the thing that you're most excited about? Again, we touched on gaming briefly, but like big picture, what's inspiring you within the Web3 space that you really want to keep cultivating?
I think, well, when I first joined sort of crypto, I went through the sort of the hype cycle, right? So I saw some crazy projects back in the day, like some people asking for crazy things, right? And it's just so unreasonable. But now I think most of that is gone. I feel like a lot of the projects are way more grounded and way more realistic and actually genuine. So I hope that trend continues. I hope that sort of the founders that we attract and the projects that want to build in crypto are just more genuine, and actually thinking about like, hey, like what impact does this have to society? How are we actually helping people rather than how can we make the next meme coin? But so, I hope that that trend continues.
So basically, watching this industry become more and more legitimate over time and kind of really fulfilling the potential that a lot of us saw from the start without a lot of the noise that came with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Imran, thank you so much for your perspectives. It was super interesting to hear about Fortify Labs, and hopefully we'll get some of the projects on as guests as well so we can dig into their individual stories. But exciting work coming out of TZ APAC, exciting work coming out of APAC in general, and looking forward to see what you guys churn out.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Marissas.
Thank you.